Okay, so we're continuing with Sefer Ha-Aggadah, page 26, and now we're reading Midrashim about Avraham Avinu. So we know from the biblical text, from the story, that Avraham was a very generous person, and he cared a lot about hospitality. The way he ran through towards the three men and brought them in and brought them food. So Hachamim comment on the pasuk, Vayita eshel b'Be'er Sheva. Avraham planted a tree in the city of Be'er Sheva. So the eshel is a very common tree in Israel. It's from the family of the ficus tree, fig. It doesn't have fruit, but it has a thick trunk and a lot of and wide branches. So it casts a lot of shade. So he planted the eshel, but the rabbis interpreted it metaphorically, eshel from the word sha'al. It's a word play, very common technique in the Midrash of turning the words around. So eshel became sha'al. So Rabbi and Rabbi Nehemiah argue what is exactly the meaning of the word eshel. And Rabbi and Rabbi Nehemiah are a nice couple. They, throughout the book, especially the Midrash on Bereshit, almost every pasuk that they bring up for discussion, Rabbi Yehuda says A, Rabbi Nehemiah says B. And I almost think that they wanted they did it in order to show people that there's no one definite interpretation of the pasuk. There are many different meanings. They did it deliberately to show that there is diversity. In any case, they say eshel, the word sha'al in Hebrew, means to ask for. Not only to ask a question, but to ask for something, request. So they say both agree that it means sha'al ma tish'al, ask for whatever you want. Abraham has this kind of generosity that he has something for each guest. But what was it exactly? According to Rabbi Yehuda, it was a pardes, which means an orchard. Even though it's a very common word in Hebrew today, pardes, it has a Persian origin. In Arabic, and in Persian, Firdaus. What?
Not American?
No. Firdaus means an orchard, and from there it came into Hebrew as Pardes, and into English as paradise. The word paradise, through the Latin and Spanish, paraíso, this all come from the same root. I'm saying it's interesting because people talk about the four parts of the Torah: Pardes, Peshat, Remes, Drash, Sod, the literal meaning, the metaphor, and all that. So you have to understand it's not something that is built into the original structure of the Torah, but rather, as the rabbis later on, who were familiar with the word Pardes, used it as an acronym. Firdaus.
So paradise comes from
Paradise. Comes from Paradise is Pardes. It's an orchard originally, Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. Yeah. So what is the Sha'al Matish'al? Te'anim va'anavim ve'rimonim. There are figs and pomegranates and grapes, meaning there are fruits of all kinds, and everyone is welcome to enjoy them. Rabbi Nehemiah Amar Eshel Pundak. It was well, today would be a motel, but back then a khan, a traveling an inn, right? That in the crossroads in the desert was very common to have that. It says, what is sha'al matish'al? Ask for whatever you want. Kikar lechem, basar, yain, betzim, whether bread or meat or wine or eggs. And in that hospitality center, what happens? Vayikra sham b'shem Adonai el olam. So the pasuk says he plants a tree and calls Hashem's name. It seems like it has somehow it is related to the ancient practice of building mizbeach. Later on, the Torah would say, do not build altars everywhere you go, and do not build them under trees. But in the time of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, this was still practiced. So Avraham travels throughout Eretz Israel, and everywhere he goes, he builds a mizbeach, an altar, and pronounces or declares Hashem's name and sovereignty, or he does it under a tree, because the tree is also a symbol of God's control of the world. But the rabbis take it differently. They say the tree is really an inn where you shows his hospitality to people. And Vayikra b'Shem Hashem, and he called Hashem's name. They say, Al tikre Vayikra ela Vayakri. Do not read this word Vayikra, he called, ela Vayakri, he made people call. This is the way you could change a verb in Hebrew from the active to the passive, reflexive, like Vayilbash, he wore, Vayalbesh, he dressed someone else. So here's a Vayikra, he announced, Vayakri, he made other people announce. How did he do that? Melamed shikri Avraham Avinu shmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu befi kol over v'shav. He made people show their gratitude to God and bless God and acknowledge God. So there are two different versions of how he did that. According to one version, after they finished eating, they came to bless Avraham. He said, you didn't eat mine. It's not my food. It's all from God. You should thank God. In a way, we have, the reversal of that in our Birkat HaMazon today, where the core of Birkat HaMazon is thanking God, but we insert the Birkat HaOreach, where the guest thanks the hosts for their hospitality, and one of the phrases of the blessing is V'yeh keshulchano shel Avraham Avinu alav shalom. Let this table be like the table of Avraham Avinu. And this, of course, is a metaphor, because Avraham Avinu did not have a table. You have to realize, in a tent, wherever you are, they sit on the ground. But they mean the abundance that Avraham Avinu served people with. So that's one version. The other version is more interesting. They said that once Abraham fed the people and they were about to leave, and they would thank him, if they would not bless Hashem, and they would say, Ten ma she'alecha. What are you thinking? You have to pay the bill. Amar lo kama yesh lecha alai. How much do I owe you? And he says, Kad yain bechach vechach litra basar. Like a jar of wine, this is what it costs. Meat, that's the price. Bread, that's the price. And they were exorbitant prices. Just like an airport, or the movie theater. They know you can't bring food from the outside. So they don't know there's a world outside with different prices. That they could set their own and kosher supermarkets as well. They also have this independent system. We could just put any price we want. So this is what Abraham does. He said, wow, this is exaggerated. We can't pay that price. He said, where else? He said, where else would you get bread and wine and meat in the desert? You have to pay. So, and then after they panic and they say, we can't pay this kind of money, he says, don't worry, you don't have to pay me. Just say, thank you to Borei Olam, to the Creator, for providing you. Because what he wanted to do, and this is the idea of the Midrash, it's not this like game that Abraham plays with his with his guests, where he could have said, like the first Midrash, just educate them about the greater to God, but rather that sometimes we, in order to understand the situation, we have to take it to an extreme. And what Abraham does here is that we take for granted the ability to eat and to enjoy what we have, or that we have food on the table. We take it for, especially today, we take it for granted. I mean, if you go to the supermarket and your specific brand with this specific flavor is missing, you'll go and complain to customer service. How come I didn't get the orange juice with some pulp, vitamin C, and in the box and not in the bottle? You don't have it, I can't live without that, right? But when Avraham says that, it's like you realize that having even your daily bread or the most basic necessities is as miraculous as finding bread and wine in the desert. We just got used to it, so we have to thank for it. This is the idea of the Midrash of Hayam Makri et Shemo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'fi omer roshav, that he made people understand and realize this concept. Following that Midrash, we have one that looks at Abraham maybe in the more negative way, and that is about Abraham going to Egypt because of the famine. So already later than Midrash, Rashi and Ramban allude to that, and they say that Abraham should not have traveled to Egypt because of the famine, because God promised him that he is going to live in Canaan, in the promised land, and it will be his. So even if there was famine, he should have waited it out. But Abraham decided to go to Egypt. According to Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, it was a precursor of what happened later on to his children. Ramban has this method of interpreting the Pesukim, especially of Bereshit, that he calls Ma'aseh Avot, Siman Lebanim. Everything that happened to the forefathers eventually happened to their children. So he says Abraham goes down to Egypt because of the famine, and so do his children. Abraham's wife is taken by Pharaoh. So also with Bnei Israel, their wives were taken, their children were attacked. God punishes Paro at the time of Abraham with plagues, and so also at the time of the Exodus, the Egyptians are plagued with the 10 plagues, and eventually Abraham leaves with great possessions. So also when the Exodus comes, Bnei Israel leave with great possessions. But with all that, Ramban says Abraham should not have gone to Egypt and put his wife in danger. Because what happens when he comes to Egypt, he tells Sarah, "Hinena yadati ki isha yifat mareat, ve'haya ki yiru otach hamitzrim, ve'haregu oti, ve'otach hayun." I know that you're a beautiful woman, and you are going to be maybe taken by the Egyptians, and if they take you, they will execute me. So don't tell them that you're my wife. Say that you're my sister. This is a complicated story, as is in the Tanakh, but the rabbis made it a little more complicated, and they say, comment on the pasuk, "Vayi kevo Avram Mitzrayma, vayiru Mitzrim etzarai keisha yifat toari." When Abraham came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarah is a beautiful woman, so they look at the pasuk, in a very very particular way, that every word means only what it means literally and not more than that. So if the Torah says that Avram came to Egypt, they say, what about Sarah? Did she not come to Egypt? So they say she's missing. Where is she? Then they say, V'Sarah echan hayta. Where was Sarah? Netana beteva v'na'al befanea kedei shelo yiru ota hamitzrim. So Avraham put Sarah in a trunk, basically in a big box, and locked it, so the tax collector would not see her and would not take her. This is definitely a projection of something that used to happen in the time of the rabbis, and not 1,000 years earlier in Egypt. But in any case, כיוון שהגיע לשערי מצרים, אמרו למוכסים, מה אתה טוען בתוך התיבה? They look at the box and say, what's in the box? They didn't have X-ray at the time, so they have to. They ask him, what do you have in it? They said, I have barley. So they say, but what if you have wheat? Wheat is more expensive than barley. You have to pay a higher tax. He says, I'll pay you a tax for wheat. They say, maybe you have peppers, hot peppers and spices. This is more expensive. And this is all the trade at the time of the rabbis, in the Greek period. This is what was considered expensive. Peppers were very expensive and sought after merchandise, the spice trade. He says, maybe you have peppers and not wheat. He says, okay, I'll pay for peppers, whatever it is. And they say, Zahavat atoim? So maybe you have, we think you have gold there. I'll pay the tax for gold. They say, finally, maybe you have silk. So also, the silk, right? More than gold. He says, I'll pay silk. And finally, he says, probably you have pearls. It's really expensive. He said, I'll pay the tax for pearls. And when he said that, אמרו, אילולא שיש בידו דבר מעולה, לא היה מקבל עליו כל מה שאנו מבקשים. Says it's impossible. Whatever we tell him, he's willing to pay. So probably he's hiding something much, much more expensive, right? if this midrash was have been written today, they would probably look for drugs. You bring heroin or whatever. But this probably back then was the top. Says we're not going to let you go until you open the trunk and show us what's in it. But when they opened it, the whole land was shining with Sarah's beauty. This midrash is strange, really. What does it tell us? We have the same element later on in midrash about Yaakov and Esav. According to the other midrash, is when Yaakov was about to meet his brother Esav, he was afraid that Esav will take over Dinah, and he did the same thing as is attributed here to Abraham. He hid his daughter in a trunk, so Esav will not see her. And that's why the Torah only speaks about Yaakov displaying his children, his boys, and not Dinah for Esav to see. But the Midrash goes on to say that his punishment was that she was eventually kidnapped and violated by Shechem ben Hamor. Both stories have no basis in the Torah. You have to realize that. They have no basis in the Torah. No foothold. Very, very flimsy foothold, maybe, that Avraham is mentioned and Sarah is not mentioned, that the sons of Yaakov are mentioned and the daughter is not mentioned. But this is not enough of a proof, because we know that usually in the biblical narrative, the woman is pushed aside. She's not mentioned unless there is a really important reason to mention her. So it seems like this midrash comes to convey a certain message that men have this natural tendency to try to protect either their wife or their daughter from other men, because they know they are familiar with the nature of men who could, I would say, cross the boundary and come into territories where they don't belong. So this portrays that. In later generations, this whole idea of putting the woman in a trunk, this sounds really crazy, right? To put a woman in a trunk. But in a way, it is expressed today in the laws of tzniut, in the laws of modesty that are imposed upon women. So depends on which religion and which culture you're looking at, right? There are lesser or greater degrees of putting a woman in some kind of a box, which is not, of course, not healthy and not desired. It's terrible. If people like to bring up the idea of the Muslims wearing burqas, and it's true. It's not something that women want to do. They are trained to do that. They are brainwashed to do that. Even in Judaism today, there's a group in Mea She'arim. They call them Neshot HaShalim. The women who wear a burqa. Like, not only them, they even make their daughters, young daughters, wear it. And this is not. People are surprised. Where did this come from? Judaism never asks for it. But the answer is, when the religious authorities, rabbis, hammer and keep mentioning that the woman has to be modest, she should not be seen, and she should not be heard, some women will take it to an extreme, or maybe in this case, rabbis who tell the women to do that. But even in more classic halakha, we have that in the past, when Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam, when he writes about the laws of modesty, he says that for a woman, it's inappropriate to travel too much, pa'am bashuk, pa'am barehovot, to be in the marketplace or in the streets, but rather she should leave the house only once or twice a month. Right? So of course, when Rambam writes that, he refers to the culture of his time. He lived first in Spain, then moved to Morocco, but spent most of his time in Egypt. And at the time also, I have to remember that when he speaks about a woman not traveling outside, she had servants, she had maids. There was a different type of society, but in a sense, it's the same idea of protecting the women from other men, and also in a way protecting the men's, the husbands or the father's possession by locking her up in the box. If you wish to add more to it. It's the same story about Rapunzel and all the other fairy tales that come from Europe about a woman being locked up so she would not be compromised. So we see two midrashim. One praises the hospitality of Abraham. The other one speaks about what he did with Sarah. Yes.
The Muslims don't let their women, single women, walk around.
Sing, yes.
Unescorted.
Sing, yes, but depends on where. In Saudi Arabia, women are not allowed to drive, for example. Yeah.